Alright, good evening everybody. I think we are live. This is Nick, creator of Haze Reviews, and I am live streaming tonight part 3 of my reading of Lusitania, a 1972 book by Colin Simpson. We have so far read through the introduction and the first 2 chapters, and it is very revealing. Quite a key historical event, as you can see from the cover of the book there on the thumbnail. This ship was breaking records in its time. It was the holder of the fastest a sub 5-day trip between Liverpool and New York, and it was built and funded by the British Admiralty, with the proviso that should it ever be needed, if a war ever kicked off, that the boat would be sort of commandeered and repurposed for use in the war. And so and then that never happened, and instead, when the war kicked off, the ship was told to continue being basically a kind of taxi, a transfer service between Liverpool and America, and it was told to continue doing that. That's where we left off the story at the end of chapter 2. And here we are today to continue with our reading and do chapter 3. So, hello and good evening. How's it going out there? If there's anybody tuning in live, please give me a message in the chat or a thumbs up or something to let me know that the sound is good and the picture's good. Yesterday, during the live stream of chapter 2, we were having some tech issues and the stream was goofing up and getting all crackly and interfered with, and so I had to upload a recording after the fact, and I think that worked okay, but there was still some audio issues with that and a few snafus with the sound. So I'm hoping that tonight is a good signal and that the stream can go on uninterrupted and in a way that people can hear. So I've got Awaken Your Mind, who says, coming in clear today. Fantastic. That is great news. Thank you for telling me in the chat. That's good to know. Good to know there's somebody out there. I'm always amazed that anybody shows up to my live streams. It is humbling and rather wonderful. So thank you for being here. And I suppose that means we can just get started. So I'm streaming tonight from Vietnam, and it is the last night in the Lunar New Year. So tonight is Lunar New Year's Eve, and midnight we'll be celebrating by letting off insane amounts of fireworks on the rooftop. But I've got a few hours until then, and this book so far has been so page-turning and gripping and exciting and informative that I just thought we'd sneak in a cheeky chapter, maybe even 2. We'll see how it goes and how we get on. But before we dive into the book and go over to carry on reading, I have something else for you that I wanted to share tonight. So as I was preparing and learning about Lusitania, I came across this article here. And I came across a number of articles actually, and I just typed into Bing. I think it was a Bing search engine, and I just typed in RMS Lusitania. And this article came up because in chapter 1, J.P. Morgan was mentioned as what Colin Simpson wrote. He wrote that the British Admiralty and the Liverpool shipbuilding company Cunard's, and in Collinson's words, he said something like, it was a shotgun wedding, and J.P. Morgan was the one holding the shotgun. And so that name J.P. Morgan should be familiar to many people who are in the sort of who are interested in history, and in particular banking, who are familiar with names like Rockefellers, Rothschilds. J.P. Morgan is one of those names that comes up and time again, and in fact I think is often considered a sort of the Rothschilds man, but over in America, something like that, if I'm not mistaken. So this article that I dug up, I was pretty happy with, because I don't know what the website is, Seeking Alpha, something to do with stock analysis and market trading, and I don't know, but so I have no idea why this article is on this website, but it doesn't really matter. But let's check it out anyway. I can't read it all, but I wanted to highlight it to people, and I'm going to stick a link to it under this video after we finish streaming, so you can get in there and read it, because I found it to be a fantastic resource. So the title, the title is so long and detailed that they ran out of space, but it says the role of J.P. Morgan in providing loans to England and France in World War One, the souring of these loans as it became apparent that Germany would win, the betrayal of a British ship, and the sacrifice American passengers as a stratagem to bring America, and then the title just cuts off there, but I guess it means to bring America into the war, because this sinking of the Lusitania is known as an event which contributed towards America being pulled into the war. And where we left off the story last time, Winston Churchill, he'd identified a strategy that if there was a German attack upon an American vessel, then it would be a win-win situation, because on the one hand, it would solidify America's relationship with the Allies, and at that time America was neutral and it wasn't involved, but it was still providing a lot of munitions and supplies, and it was neutral, but it was still trading and giving supplies. So Winston Churchill said if a U-boat attacks and takes an American ship out, it will cement that trading relationship and partnership. But in the best case scenario, it would pull America in to fight against the Germans on the side of the Allies. And so there's kind of an idea, and I've seen in a few places there's a sort of narrative and a suggestion that the Germans were going to come out on top. And if it wasn't for the Americans joining the war, that could have happened. And so this article, when it starts getting into J.P. Morgan and the role that J.P. Morgan played financing both England and France, but it turns out later on in the article as well, it tells us that he was also involved in giving money to the Germans in some way, and Russia. And so these kind of bankers, Rothschilds, J.P. Morgan, these kind of people, they profit from war no matter who's, they don't take sides. They profit just from war itself, and they will profit no matter who comes out on top. As long as they are aware of that as early as possible, so that they can pull the right moves on the exchanges to make sure they're in a good position to profit. So J.P. Morgan, his name popping up in chapter 1, that kind of sent my spider sense off. And so when I found this blog, I was happy that it would go into more detail about this banker's connection. And so let's just scroll down a little bit. It's a really long, detailed article, but I'll just read through a couple of paragraphs here. So, an investment in war. The exigencies of war in Europe required England and France to go heavily into debt. When their respective central banks and local merchant banks could no longer meet that need, the beleaguered governments turned to the Americans and selected the House of Morgan, acting as partners of the Rothschilds, to act as sales agent for their bonds. Most of the money raised in this fashion was quickly returned to the United States to acquire war-sensitive materials, and Morgan was selected as a U.S. purchase agent for those as well. A commission was paid on all transactions in both directions, once when the money was borrowed and again when it was spent. And this is the kind of sinister practice at the heart of our monetary, financial, and banking systems, which is really leading towards the kind of enslavement of so many people out there who aren't kind of wise to this, which is this sort of practice of usury and fractional reserve banking, and creating money and lending it on interest. It's a very sinister practice, and it always leads to debt and more debt and more debt and more buildup of debt. And if you don't believe me, then just look at the national debt of America, which recently hit either 33 or 34 trillion for the first time in history, and much of that was created out of thin air and given to people in the last sort of 4 years or so. So this style of money lending, lending at interest, of usury, it causes all sorts of havoc and all sorts of problems, and they kick the can down the road and kick it down the road and kick it down the road, and it ends up affecting the children and the grandchildren of the people who take out those loans in the first place. So it's a very kind of long-term way to ensnare and limit the freedoms of people intergenerationally. So it's very sinister. Back to the text. Furthermore, many of the companies receiving production contracts were either owned outright by Morgan holding companies or were securely within his orbit of bank control. Yeah. So what the Colin Simpson told us in the book was that JP Morgan had I think a controlling share, like he held the controlling interest of shares in every single shipping company in the world, pretty much, except for the Cunard company who built the Lusitania, and some French shipbuilders as well. So there was only those two that JP Morgan. There's only those two pies that JP Morgan didn't have his fingers in. So I'm sure that drove the House of Morgan insane because these kind of greedy people always want more and more and more and more. They're kind of like that hungry ghost that can never eat, and so it can never feel full and never feel satisfied. Under such arrangement, it will not be surprising to learn, as we shall in a moment, that Morgan was not overly anxious to see hostilities come to a close. Exactly. So if you're benefiting from loaning money to governments during wartime, you want that war to continue. Of course you do, because then the more money they borrow from you, the more they owe you in interest, and the more money you make and the richer you get. Even the most honorable of men can be corrupted by the temptation of such gigantic flows of cash. Not only did England and France pay for their supplies with money furnished by Wall Street, but they made their purchases through the same medium. Inevitably, the House of Morgan was selected for this important task. Thus, the war had given Wall Street an entirely new role. In addition to selling stocks and bonds, financing railroads, and performing the other tasks of a great banking center, Wall Street began to deal in shells, cannons, submarines, blankets, clothing, shoes, canned meats, wheat, and the thousands of other articles needed for the prosecution of a great war. Now, this is very curious and interesting to me because Wall Street it pops up again and again, the Wall Street financiers. Very noticeably and importantly, we've got Anthony C. Sutton's work. He did a trilogy on Wall Street and their involvement with one was about their involvement with Hitler, one was about their involvement with Bolshevism, the Bolshevik Revolution, and the last one was, I think, Franklin D. Roosevelt. And this is a trilogy of books, and I've reviewed Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler on my channel, so you can have a look at that if that sounds intriguing to you, because all these wars, all the, communism had to be funded, fascism has to be funded. The money for these movements, these armies, has to come from somewhere, and generally we find out that it's bankers and banking families that are the spider at the center of the web, time and time and time again. So I won't spend too much more time on this article. You've had a little sort of flavor of it there. What I do want to show you is the number of books that are referenced in this article that I hadn't heard of. And this is what I loved about this blog post, because it gave me like 10 new books that I'd never heard of. And so that always gets me very excited and very interested when I have a load of new books to add to my wish list and to get hold of, hopefully, in the future. So the first one that popped up was this book, John Moody, The Masters of Capital. This is a 1919 book. And so, as I've said before many, many times, any books written before the advent of computing and the internet are valuable. I would say, well, probably not all of them, but a great many of them, because this was a different era. This was a time when people had to remember things and construct and do actual feet on the ground research and learning to put all the information together for their book. So The Masters of Capital by John Moody. This was in, I think this is on, there's a copy on Amazon here for £62.81. But there's this one on eBay. Look at that. It's like, I think that's the first edition. Look, that's got to be. Check that out. It's a discard from the University of New Haven. So these kind of old books like this really get me interested. Yeah. Copyright 1919 by Yale University Press, and at $14.99, and it's $6 shipping to where I am. That is an absolute steal and a bargain, in my opinion. So that's the kind of thing that I would snap up straight away. But I've already spent my book budget this month, unfortunately. So maybe somebody out there who watching this can go and snap that up and preserve it, and maybe do a live stream and share it with us. That would be lovely. So this reference here is to a book by Chernow, and it doesn't actually give us the name of the book, but I'm guessing it is this one, which is The House of Morgan, An American Banking Dynasty and the Rise of Modern Finance by Ron Chernow. Hardcover, £238.99, which is wild. But I did get a copy, and I got it for much, much cheaper than that, and you can do that too if you know where to look. But Ron Chernow, he has a number of books actually on these famous families. The House of Morgan, and the other one is about the Warburgs. And that's a big, thick, chunky doorstop of a book. So those are the first two books referenced. But if I scroll down, and you can see I've highlighted the other books in the article. So there's this one here, Woodrow Wilson and World War One. That's a 1985 book. This is a 1971 book, Crowded Years. What else we got? America's 60 Families. I don't know why this isn't highlighted, because this book I'd never heard of this one, and this one really piqued my interest. America's 60 Families by Ferdinand Lundberg. So I went hunting to find out if there's any copies of this anywhere online, and I did find one here, also on eBay, and this is listed as a collectible book, and I'm not surprised. Look at that, fantastic. On the picture here, it says on the front cover, who really controls America and how do they keep their power? This bombshell of a book tells a fantastic story of the lords of wealth and their glittering clans. Startling in its facts, staggering in its implications, it has raised more controversy than any book of the decade. And that is also a kind of thick tome. And you can see here what happens to the pages when they go like this. This is because the glue holding the pages together in the spine of the book is just, it's old, and it just begins to kind of turn to powder and dissolve, and then all the pages become out of whack, and that's generally considered to be, a poor, maybe an average quality or a poor quality book at that point. And this one's scuffed. This one's got kind of little bits missing from the dust jacket, and yet it's still listed for a very cool $124.66. But how about that? Wouldn't that be a fantastic book to dive into and learn from? This is 1940. Incredible. So that one stood out to me as well. I'd love to get a copy of that one day. And then what else we got? Yeah, so we've got the Columbia Encyclopedia referenced in the article. We've got Charles Seymour's book, The Intimate Papers of Colonel House. We've got this one here, George Viereck, The Strangest Friendship in History, Woodrow Wilson and Colonel House. So if you don't know about their relationship and this is a really good blog to give you an insight into the connection between these two men. It's very, very unique and quite, I think, overlooked. Colonel House is somebody, again, I hadn't heard of until I started tumbling down the rabbit hole in 2020 and landed on the Peace Revolution podcast and the work of Richard Grove and the Grand Theft World podcast were first edition copies of these intimate papers of Colonel House. And so this book from 1932 I had a look for, The Strangest Friendship in History, and I think I found that here. And that's a cool £205. So you can kind of get the picture, and you can see what's happening here is that these books are valuable, and they're only going to get more valuable as time goes by. And it tends to be when these books are telling us the truth about some piece of occulted history, or the neglected aspect that's been left out, not taught to us in our schools. The books that do teach us this stuff tend to be pricey and harder to find and out of print, although you can get new copies and new printed versions as well. But you never know if they've been messed with, if something's been changed or deleted or altered or left out or whatever. So it's always better to try and grab that first edition if you can. And then this one was super interesting. So this is C. Hartley Grattan, and he has this book called Why We Fought. And this is all to do with, if I'm not mistaken, how this is a kind of contemporary account of how America was brought into World War One. So written very soon after the fact. And if you try and track down a copy of this bad boy, you're looking at £622. Why We Fought, hardcover, 1st of Jan 1929. I think I found another version of it here on eBay. That's $370. Look at that. Wow. You got a little snippet and a little view of what's going on in there as well. That would be an amazing one to get hold of too. But these kind of artifacts, which are contemporary, the primary source documents, which really shine a light on the thinking and the outlook and the understanding and the knowledge of the time, these things are kind of hidden, not emphasized, and not told. We're not told about them. We have to go to some strange website like seekingalpha.com by way perhaps of Hayes reviews on YouTube in order to learn about these books, which all seem very fascinating and interesting. So some of the other books which popped up. So this was this is America's 60s Families, and I had a look for other books by Ferdinand Lundberg, and there was this one which looked quite intriguing: The Rich and the Super Rich. Who really owns America? How do they keep their wealth and power? That one's a little bit cheaper. We've got In Quest of Truth and Justice, Debunking the War Guilt Myth. I think this is the cheapest one that I found, but it was also mentioned in the article. But another one that I think would be worth getting hold of, and then here's the cheapest one I found: Pierpont Morgan and Friends, The Anatomy of a Myth. That's a 1973 book, and that's only like £8. So that is one that I could probably spontaneously buy and just grab and get hold of. I don't have, apart from the Chernow book, I don't have much on the Morgans, and so one about Pierpont Morgan, the man himself, would probably get to add to the collection. Oh, and here's the In Quest of Truth and Justice, again, Debunking the War Guilt Myth, Harry Elmer Barnes. So, there you go. I will link to this blog post underneath the video today, and then you can dive in there and have a look and get more context on the story that we're learning about in the book Lusitania, and also dig in there and dive in there and there's the book. There's the book we're reading at the minute, also referenced in this blog, which is also a good sign. We're among good company. But yeah, a great resource there for further learning, and for any bibliophiles out there, good place to stock up on extra books, beef up your library even more. And if that wasn't enough, I found a few other web pages which I will link underneath. And these ones I haven't read in detail, but they have some incredible artifacts in terms of pictures and like ship designs that you can have a look at here. I don't know if we can zoom into that, unfortunately. But you know, contemporary news clippings, pictures of, I suppose, people who were sailing on the boat at the time, some propaganda efforts as well, newspaper, full stories here. This is a page of the cargo manifest listing ammunition aboard the Lusitania. Boom, look at that. So if you remember, or if you've seen the first two parts of the series, we found out in the introduction that there were multiple different versions of the manifest, and they all had a totally different list of the things that were being held on the ship. I don't think any of them mentioned ammunition, and they were all copies, implying that the original was nowhere to be found. And so very, very curious and very interesting, and a very good resource if you want to get an insight into some of the paperwork. And this is the medal, right? I think this is the medal that we learned about in the introduction. This is a picture of the medal that we learned about in the introduction of the video, which turned out to be made by Selfridge, wasn't it? Or it wasn't designed by him, but Selfridge, the department store owner here in the UK, had something like, let's see, maybe 3,000 copies is there. I thought he said 40,000, but he was the one who kind of commissioned these to get these made. It was, the design was done as a piece of satire, and then out of his own pocket, Selfridge paid for I don't know, multiple thousands of these to be made and handed out. So here is an archive link to the sinking of the Lusitania. So this looks like an amazing moving pen picture. You can go and check that out. So more good resources for further learning. This one also has some excellent details on it. This one's a bit more focused on the ship, the mechanics of it, the details, the ins and outs, the facts and the figures, but still very good if you're into that sort of thing. Cruising speed, max speed. And then this last one is how Americans reacted to the sinking of the RMS Lusitania. And so a very key part of the story, because it was the Americans that needed to be drummed up and made emotional and made furious and made angry at the Germans so that they wouldn't kind of kick the shit out of their government for dragging for making them go to war, right? So and look at these newspaper scans, just incredible history that I think is well worth diving into. Some of the pictures as well. And that's the president keeping calm, having a game of doing a bit of pitch and putt, it looks like. Then we've got a story here of Vanderbilt. Now that's it. Oh, we've got Alfred Vanderbilt and Mrs. Alfred Vanderbilt, the $80 million widow. Just fascinating stuff, isn't it? And if you remember as well, in the introduction to the book, Colin Simpson quoted from the kind of the official investigation into what happened. And it was a very one-sided account. They had a narrative and they had to push that narrative. And in that, it talked about how, everybody aboard was harmless and innocent. I'm sure there were some scallywags on there that can be labeled as totally innocent and harmless individuals, on a ship of thousands of people. I'm sure there was a few scallywags on there, but and the interesting thing as well is that the 200 die, and there you've got 1,046, 1,300, 400 Americans, 132 Americans. So I guess these are reports coming out as the event unfolds, as they're catching up with the details on and the full scale of the tragedy and what happened. So links below this for your below this video for further learning, further research. Enjoy that and hoover up some of those books and preserve them because they look extremely valuable and very interesting. And if you don't, I will, and you've only got yourself to blame at that point. I won't be refreshing my book budget for probably another month, so strike while the iron's hot. I shouldn't be putting it out there like this, should I? They'll probably double the price or something. Not that anyone, not that the eBay sellers will be watching this, but you never know, do you? You never know. All right, so we've got Peter. Good evening. Welcome back. Nice to have you here again. And yeah, awaken your mind. He is saying, I've needed some help from views with tech issues on live. Yeah. It's usually not a problem when I'm at home in my usual little book enclosure. But at the minute I'm traveling, I'm in Vietnam. I'm relying on wireless, which is a bit spotty. But tonight seems to be good. And I think it's coming through very well. We haven't got any more complaints. We haven't got anyone saying that we've got any problems. And so let's continue with the book. Over to the book cam. I'm just going to have a little sip. As it's New Year's Eve, I've got my little New Year's beer. This is a Sapphire Golden. It's a local Vietnamese beer. That's one nice thing that I really love about coming to Vietnam is that they have industry and businesses all in the country. They produce most of their own food, most of their own products, television, all they make it all in-house, so to speak, and so they have a very thriving, bustling economy. Everyone's running some sort of little business or hustle or side hustle out of their homes. It's just a thriving, bustling place to be compared to the sort of washed out corpse of inactivity, which is many towns and cities in England, in the UK where I'm from. There's not a lot going on in some of those places. Anyway. Good afternoon, Hasdak. Welcome. And Frank Lennon is going to watch from the beginning later on. Sure, no worries. We haven't actually got into the book, Frank. So if you're here for the book, I've just been rambling on and about a blog post and some book recommendations that I found. But we're just about to start the book. So if you want to stick around, feel free. But if you want to catch on the replay, feel free to do that as well. Nothing is obligatory here. But yes, that is 30 minutes of rambling. That's probably a new record for me. So let's get into the book. I've got to be wrapped up by midnight at the very latest because fireworks on the roof. Don't want to miss that. All right, cool. So it's chapter 3. Let's continue. Alfred and George Booth were cousins, members of a family which was and is one of Liverpool's phenomena. Alfred Booth and Co., the family business, accurately reflected the diverse character of its constituent members. A free-thinking Unitarian background had been matched by an equally independent and entrepreneurial business sense which had painstakingly capitalized on steam power and foreign trade. By the beginning of this century, Alfred Booth and Co. owned a sizable holding in Cunard, their own shipping line, the Booth Steamship Company Limited, factories, tanneries, and building enterprises in Brazil, the United States, and England, and were financially linked with numerous other steamship, wharfage, and wholesaling concerns. The Booths' marriage ties were as diverse as they were impressive. Alfred Booth's father had married a butler, daughter of no, I just read that as like the job, like the father had married a butler, some other family's butler, but that's capital B. So daughter of one of the affairs of Cunard. At the age of 42, he was a chairman. Alfred Booth was tall and meticulously turned out, and the family independence expressed itself in him by an unwillingness to delegate and a distinct tendency to irritable autocracy. His personal letters and business correspondence show that he was rarely diverted from a course. Oh, I've just been told the sounds drop and I'm muted. I didn't mute on purpose. Has it come back? Sweet, we're back. I'll go back to the start of that paragraph. Alfred Booth was tall and meticulously turned out, and the family independence expressed itself in him by an unwillingness to delegate and a distinct tendency to irritable autocracy. His personal letters and business correspondence show that he was rarely diverted from a course once he had made up his mind, and he liked neither advice nor instruction. Despite, or because of, these limitations, he ran Cunard like clockwork. He had a hearty contempt for the Admiralty, a contempt that he concealed from authority so successfully that a grateful government gave him a baronetcy in 1916. His main outlet for his feelings was in his letters to his father and his cousin. George Booth was a very different man. His father, apart from running the family business, had been a radical and pioneering writer on social questions, whose monumental Life and Labour of the People of London had been largely responsible for reawakening the Victorian conscience as to the casualties of the materialism of the era. His friends included Henry Hobhouse, Beatrice Webb, Lord Parmore, and Daniel Meinertzhagen, the London banker. Now, Beatrice and Sidney Webb, they are the founders of the London School of Economics with George Bernard Shaw and Fabian Socialists. They started the group, the Fabian Socialist group, if I am not mistaken. Their name came up in our reading of the Bertrand Russell book, which I did before we started this one. So Beatrice Webb, interesting. The other ones I haven't heard of. George shared both his father's sympathies and friends to the extent of marrying Meinertzhagen's daughter and introducing and maintaining a unique paternalistic social security system for his firm's employees. He was also an extremely shrewd and enterprising businessman, a fact recognized by the Bank of England, who invited him to become a director when he was only 37. In appearance he is easy to describe, though he would have hated the comparison. He looked exactly like the late Humphrey Bogart. The day after the outbreak of war, George Booth took a train from Liphook in Hampshire to Waterloo. In the same carriage was Sir Hubert Llewellyn Smith, the permanent secretary at the Board of Trade. Sir Hubert remarked that now the country was at war it was not going to be so easy to commute, and George Booth courteously offered him bed and breakfast at his London house on Campden Hill, Kensington. Sir Hubert accepted. Most evenings for the next few weeks the Booth house was to be the scene of a remarkable series of meetings. Dining there on the 6th of August 1914, Sir Hubert brought with him Walter Runciman, the president of the Board of Trade, and after dinner Runciman told those present of the first squabble in the cabinet. Sorry, let me redo that. And after dinner, Runciman told those present it was the cabinet's collective opinion that the war would be over remarkably quickly, but Field Marshal Lord Kitchener, the newly appointed Secretary of State for War, had stood out against this view. He was adamant that it would be a war of long duration, and he had closely questioned the Board of Trade as to their plans for supplying the enormous quantities of war materials that were going to be required. He had apparently also delved deep into the War Office and Admiralty plans for meeting their requirements and had been distressed to find that our stocks of munitions and supplies of all kinds were only enough for a 3-month campaign. The British Army, for example, had no winter equipment beyond its full-dress parade greatcoats. Hitherto, he had remarked to Runciman that morning, equipping the army has been no more difficult than buying a straw hat in Harrods. But from now on the army, the navy, and perhaps these airmen are going to need greater quantities of material than has ever been made before. End quote. He had regretted that there was no centralized buying or distribution policy and urged the cabinet to organize something. Asquith had turned down the idea. On Walter Runciman's initiative, George Booth was now asked to form an unofficial committee of financiers, shipowners, and industrialists who would help plan for the contingency Kitchener envisaged, and in the meantime assist, in a covert way, whenever there were bottlenecks or other problems in the supply or distribution of war material. By the time Alfred Booth was ordered to put the Lusitania back on the New York run, his cousin's committee had been formed and was just gaining acceptance from the cabinet. George Booth was an excellent picker of men. He chose 2 young accountants from the North Eastern Railway, Eric Jedds and George Becquerel. That's George Beharrell. Maynard Keynes, the Cambridge economist, I've heard of his name before, and Cecil Baring, the banker. F.S. Oliver from Debenham and Freebody's department store was co-opted to supervise clothing supplies, and Booth's family firm was raided to obtain W.H. Tregonning as a member of the Liner Requisition Committee, and Austin Fletcher, who was given the task of setting up a prize court department to settle the fate of ships and cargoes caught trying to evade the British blockade. Contacts with the government were arranged by the Board of Trade, seconding U.F. Wintour from their exhibitions department as secretary to the committee. He eventually became Director of Army Contracts. Sir Frederick Black, Director of Admiralty Contracts, was detailed by the 3rd Sea Lord to liaise with George Booth on a daily basis. In May 1915, after Lloyd George became Minister of Munitions, Booth's committee formed the nucleus of the new ministry. Before this date, the committee was both officially unofficial and secret. The members had to meet daily, but as yet they had neither premises nor formal authority. The latter point was covered by strenuous application and use of the old boy network. Fortunately, everyone knew everyone else. All that was needed was somewhere for them to meet. George Booth solved the problem characteristically. The meetings took place at his home on Campden Hill in the evenings, and every day at his club. The Reform in Pall Mall. That's the name of his club. Every day at his club, the Reform in Pall Mall, which gave him a special table in the dining room given by the committee the name of the Round Table. Now check that out, the name of the Round Table. Who else do we know that has round table groups and meetings? I'll give you 10 points if you can shout that out in the comments. These luncheons became the focal point around which the numerous problems of supply, shipment and finance were resolved. Late in September 1914, Sir Frederick Black and Wintour buttonholed George Booth after one of the lunches. Both had problems to be resolved which involved supplies from the United States. Eventually, consignments of both the orders involved were to be shipped on the last voyage of the Lusitania. Sir Frederick Black wanted substantial quantities of gun cotton which was needed for mines. Britain's publicly declared policy was one of antipathy to mining, and in fact, the loudest voice was Churchill's, who still believed that the war would be over in a matter of weeks. The Admiralty and Foreign Office had raised a great outcry when the Germans mined the approaches to Harwich on the first day of the war, and Churchill had opposed British mining on the grounds of fouling the sea, which we already commanded. Churchill was undoubtedly sincere in his beliefs, but there was a more secret reason which had hitherto denied Britain the chance to mine. At the outbreak of the war, the Admiralty's stock consisted of only 4,000 mines, and their early attempts to lay them had proved a fiasco. The 500-weight sinkers would not hold the mines in position, and they had dragged all over the place. Admiral Jellicoe had complained that, as fast as our mines have been laid, they have drifted away, owing to our idiotic habit of using too small mooring rope. End quote. Those laid in the Channel on the outbreak of war had drifted as much as 18 miles, and Admiral Oliver had described them as an infernal nuisance. The British mines were also more dangerous to the British than to the Germans. Frequently, they blew off the sterns of the mine layers, but when they did make contact with a German ship, they generally failed to explode. Numerous German ships carried a British mine mounted on their decks as a souvenir. I've got an asterisk here for the footnote. The claim of the British official history of the war that British mines never sank a non-German ship is specious. They were, as Churchill had rightly said, a pollution of the seas. Of the 9,000 mines laid by January 1915, over 4,000 were adrift and unaccounted for. Admiralty records confirm that as late as April 1917, over 90% of British mines were too dangerous to be laid. Professor Marder covers the mining fiasco in great detail in From the Dreadnought to Scapa Flow, Volume 2, pages 77 to 82. So there's another book for your consideration as well. Back to the text. There was, however, a strong mining lobby in the Admiralty, and behind Churchill's back they had persuaded the Prime Minister to order him to adopt an aggressive mining policy. Asquith did so on 29th of September 1914. Sir Frederick Black now wanted 1,000 tons of gun cotton to be consigned to the Director of Naval Intelligence designate, Captain Reginald Hall, who was handling the matter, as the change of policy was to be kept secret. It's likely that Hall was the prime mover of the policy switch. For the Army, Wintour had two problems. First, he wanted to find a manufacturer to make up 2 million sets of accoutrements, leather pouches, belts and bandoliers, for the new volunteer army Kitchener was raising. This was a simple matter, and a sample set would be sent to Booth. The second was a more curious tale. An American entrepreneur called Alfred Fraser had walked into the War Office carrying a sheepskin coat. He had walked out again with an order for 100,000 of them at 37 shillings each. The War Office had then been asked to pay the money in advance, but had refused to do so. Would Mr. Booth check on Fraser, and if the coats existed, arrange for their purchase and immediate shipment to the UK? There was one other small point. The American government was being rather difficult about the shipping of military supplies and allowing Britain to incur indebtedness for war material. Wintour wondered if Booth and his family would arrange to bridge the cost of army purchases from the dollar holdings of Booth & Co. in New York. George Booth agreed to do all that he was asked. Cecil Baring intervened to say that he thought that perhaps the Bank of Montreal could assist in this respect, and it was finally arranged that Booth would also call on the British ambassador in Washington, Sir Cecil Springrice, to discuss future funding arrangements in the event that the United States continued to be recalcitrant about the purchase and shipment of war material. Finally, Sir Frederick handed Booth a written letter of introduction to Captain Guy Gaunt, then British Naval Attaché in Washington, who was in touch with the manufacturer of gun cotton but, of course, as a diplomat, could not actually place an order or deal direct. George Booth was impressed with the confidence shown in him. He wrote delightedly to his cousin Alfred and his father, who agreed that Booth & Co. should handle the financing of the army purchases. Alfred asked him to make sure that Cunard got its share of the cargoes and arranged for him to have a suite aboard the Lusitania. George Booth sailed from Liverpool on the 24th of October on the liner's first voyage since the Admiralty had given instructions for her to be put back into service. He was allocated the parlour suite, number B70, but the Lusitania was a different ship from the one to which he was accustomed. The first point that he noticed was that the stewards were no longer as spry as they used to be. The second, that the ship seemed much livelier. For the first time in years of Atlantic travel, he was miserably seasick. The same fate befell many of the first-class passengers, most of whom he noted in his diary were either service officers in civilian clothes or members of delegations and purchasing commissions. He raised the matter of his sickness with the master, Captain Dow, who was both an old acquaintance and notorious for being sick in all but the calmest weather. This and his native Scottish caution had earned him the nickname Fairweather Dow, by which he was known throughout the merchant marine. Captain Dow explained that the ship was lively for a very good reason. The Admiralty had gutted the lowest deck, F deck, thereby removing much of the weight in the bottom of the ship. The steel strengthening of the shelter deck, C deck, had caused an increase in her top hamper, and the area forward of number 2 funnel on the same deck was entirely in Admiralty hands and closed off from the rest of the ship. Okay, so these changes are the ones that they did at the end of chapter 1, I think. Was it chapter 1? Which ended with the ship being recalled so that it could be altered and prepared for war. And then at the end of chapter 2, it was decided that it wouldn't be used to be a fighting ship. It would instead carry on making this run between New York and Liverpool. However, it would be run by the Admiralty, and this is what he's finding out now, is that they've changed a lot of it, and all the staff on there are now, a lot of them are service officers in civilian clothes. And so this is why things have changed very much since he was last on there. Dow explained that the Admiralty had removed the guns mounted fore and aft and showed Booth the concealed gun rings in the planking of the shelter deck. He did not know whether the guns were still on board, but suspected that at least some of them were, locked up in the forward section of the deck, which had been closed off. He added that the Admiralty had also closed off the whole forward passenger accommodation on all decks below C deck, and that this had involved the closure of the second-class smoking room and the third-class dining room. Second and third-class passengers now had to feed in shifts in the second-class dining room at the stern of the ship, and the stewards were loud in their complaints. The result of gutting so much forward accommodation had made the ship light on the bow, and this was why she was corkscrewing as well as rolling heavily. Dow said that he thought it would doubtless be better when that area was full of cargo on the homeward run, and Booth resolved not to disappoint him. He was to write to his cousin from New York, "The accoutrement business goes well, which should please the War Office and settle poor Fairweather's stomach." End quote. Booth's visit was a success. He placed orders for the accoutrements and managed to arrange for most of them to be shipped on Cunard liners as they offered the fastest service. With Captain Gaunt, he visited Dupont de Nemours and placed orders both for the gun cotton and for the special containers in which it was to be shipped. Thirdly, with Gaunt's assistance, he established that Alfred Fraser was a rogue. The sheepskin coats came from Boston, and Gaunt discovered that the Boston manufacturers were selling them to an agent in New York called Heckman at 14 shillings each. Heckman sold them to Fraser on a 5% commission basis, and even allowing for packing, shipping, and insurance, Fraser was making a mammoth profit for what was really little more than an introduction. Some hard talking ensued. Gaunt appears to have been a rather unusually accomplished naval attaché. Contractual difficulties precluded the total elimination of Fraser from the bargain, and he was retained on a 5% commission basis for the transaction. Gaunt agreed to handle the New York end, and Booth financed the purchase. Thereafter, Fraser became a cipher to be used as Gaunt wished. There was a need for ciphers. The American administration was in confusion as to whether or not to allow military materials to be shipped to belligerent powers, and eventually agreed that individuals could ship to individuals. However, it reminded its citizens that should they ship contraband, that contraband would be liable to seizure if intercepted on the high seas. In this event, the American government would not be prepared to defend the shippers' rights. It was an admirably useful neutral decision, technically giving both German and Allied nationals the right to purchase supplies and export them back to their own countries. In the German case, it was an abstract right because of the blockade, but the German government accepted that it was a perfectly legal and proper decision. That's very good of them, isn't it? The problem was to disguise the shipments so that they appeared to be an innocent transaction between one trader and another. Contraband goods were almost inevitably shipped in the names of spurious firms, and Fraser provided one such. A study of the manifests of cargoes leaving New York during the autumn of 1914 and the spring of 1915 indicates Alfred Fraser as one of the largest traders in North America, when in fact he was an undischarged bankrupt, living off the combined wits of himself and Captain Gaunt. The second reason for security was the American habit of publishing each day the details of the cargo manifests of ships which had left the day before. This provided information to Germans and Allies alike. The Allies used the manifest to discover which neutral ships carried contraband to the Germans, and the Germans in their turn passed the details of British shipments to their submarines. The British solution of this problem was to discover a loophole in the regulations of the Port of New York. These stipulated that before the Collector of Customs could issue a clearance to sail, a sworn copy of the true manifest had to be deposited with him. A neat way around the regulations was found. It appeared that a passenger ship often did not know how many passengers it was going to carry on any particular voyage until shortly before sailing, and therefore, in those days before universal refrigeration, would purchase last-minute provisions on the dockside. Under the health laws of New York, a supplementary manifest had to be handed in after the ship sailed if additional foodstuffs had been acquired or if any last-minute passengers had brought with them any dutiable luggage. It became standard British practice to obtain clearance to sail on the basis of a false manifest and false affidavit, and some 4 or 5 days after sailing to turn in a supplementary manifest which gave a truer picture of the ship's cargo. This subterfuge was acquiesced in by the Collector of Customs, Dudley Field Malone, a former Treasury lawyer whom President Wilson had appointed to the nearest sinecure of his job as a reward for political favours. Malone knew of the ruse and countenanced it because he was determinedly pro-Ally. The most serious problem was the absolute embargo which the State Department placed on the shipment of munitions of war upon passenger ships. Here, Cunard's New York attorneys offered helpful advice. They discovered that in 1910, the Union Metallic Cartridge Co. of Bridgeport, Connecticut, which by 1915 was part of the Remington Arms Corporation, had wished to send sporting cartridges by fast passenger steamers on American coastal routes in order to avoid interstate difficulties. They had applied to the Municipal Explosives Commission of New York City and invited them to a demonstration at which they offered to prove that cartridges would not explode if dropped or exposed to fire. The Commission accepted the invitation, and the demonstration was held on the 27th of July 1910 at the UMC testing range in Connecticut, where the company entertained the commissioners to a luncheon before setting out to the range. The demonstration consisted of piling up a quantity of shotgun shells in their cardboard cases, together with caliber 22, 38, and 45 pistol shells, all filled with black powder. A fire was lit against the pile and kept burning for 25 minutes. The cartridges took fire and burned fiercely, but as the gases were not confined in a gun barrel or under pressure, they did not do more than throw the shot a few feet. The commissioners, who were respectively a lawyer and meat importer, were mightily impressed by this public relations exercise and granted permission for cartridges to be shipped on passenger ships and trains, provided they were stamped non-explosive in bulk. From October 1914 until they entered the war, the United States sent the Allies over 500,000 tons of cordite, gun cotton, nitrocellulose, fulminate of mercury, and other explosive substances, all franked with such a certificate, and the cooperative Malone allowed them to pass. George Booth returned to England on the Cunarder Orduna early in November, well satisfied with his visit. He reported to Kitchener, the Board of Trade, and Sir Frederick Black, to whom he made special mention of the immense help Captain Gaunt had been to him. He added that he felt there was an overriding need for a centralized purchasing and financial authority in New York, and suggested the name of J.P. Morgan & Co. as a suitable firm to fulfill this function. Though he had his personal loyalties to his own bankers, Baring Bros., who also favored the setting up of such an American organization, but in conjunction with the First National Bank of New York, He was influenced by the fact that easy as it might be to arrange the financing and purchasing, the cargoes still had to be shipped. The Morgan Group had substantial tonnage in their International Mercantile Marine Combine, and the appointment of Morgan would help to bring this tonnage to the Allied cause. There were other factors which influenced the British government's decision. The attitude of the American administration did not appear to favour the Allies, and if anyone could drive a coach and horses through the mass of red tape and prohibitions established by President Wilson to support his neutrality, it was J.P. Morgan Jr. In fact, he had already sent a secret emissary to London to discuss the matter. This was H.P. Davidson, who told Sir George Paysh at the Treasury that the House of Morgan had decided that they could not and would not remain neutral and would do all in their power to help. So pretty interesting there that J.P. Morgan chose not to remain neutral first, before any of the politicians did, before anyone else got involved. It was almost like J.P. Morgan were leading the way in that respect. This so impressed Lloyd George that he decided to use Morgan's services even though a lower rate of commission had been offered by the First National Bank. Morgan took the job and established a special department to handle the difficult matter of purchasing for Britain all the war materials she needed. Throughout the period of America's neutrality, British servicemen in civilian clothes worked at Morgan's. This great banking combine rapidly established such a labyrinthine network of false shippers, bank accounts, and all the paraphernalia of smuggling that although they fooled the Germans, there were also some very serious occasions when they flummoxed the Admiralty and Cunard, not to speak of the unfortunate passengers on the liners who carried the contraband. Okay, so it sounds very right. So that's the end of chapter 3. So we'll just pause there. So J.P. Morgan is proving to be a very important player in this whole event. And I had no idea that was going to be the case when I got the book and chose to read into it. I did know that the Lusitania was a kind of historical example of an event happening and then the mainstream narrative put out there proving to be completely false and fabricated at a later date when files and evidence became declassified and when people started looking into it. So I knew that there was kind of some revelation there because I often think people need to be more aware of history, because when they see the kind of scams and skullduggery that goes on in history, it makes them more able to see the scams and skullduggery that goes on in the present day. And so some people, they might be like, oh, they would never do that. And it's like, well, they did it before. So what's changed exactly that means they wouldn't do it again now? And so, like I mentioned at the beginning of yesterday's video, it could be a LIHOP scenario, which is let it happen on purpose, LIHOP. But it could also be a MIHOP scenario, which is made it happen on purpose, MIHOP. In this case, it's kind of shaping up to be more of a MIHOP situation. I think that with the I think the decision was made some way earlier when when Lusitania was told not to go to war. We're not gonna deploy you with machine guns and put you in and out there battling German submarines. Just keep running that shipping lane, doing that route between Liverpool and New York, and we'll take over and put our own kind of we'll run it. The Admiralty will run it from that point on. So the decision was made somewhere back there, which would be chapter 2. So it seems to me like they're planning things, they're putting it in place. They knew J.P. Morgan would be able to fluff all the bureaucracy to make it look legit, to do all the paperwork, to come up with all the shell companies and the labyrinth. What it was the word labyrinthine, wasn't it? A labyrinthine network of false shippers' bank accounts and all the paraphernalia of smuggling. Yeah. So that's, I think, one of the modus operandi of these kind of financier families and the banking system in general and the money makers is they make everything so labyrinthine, convoluted, complicated, so that it's kind of mysterious and it kind of puts most people off from ever trying to understand it and dig into it and find out and ask the deeper questions about this system and to discover, you know, who designed it, who created it, and therefore uncovering its true purpose, which I would submit is to rip off the most amount of people possible. But what do you guys think about chapter 3? Got any comments? Or let's have a look quickly at the chat. We got Heidi. Oh, hello. Welcome, Heidi. Good to see you there here again. Peter says Bohemian Grove, and Awaken Your Mind says Committee CFR 300 Roundtable. Yeah. So the Roundtable group goes back to Cecil Rhodes. Like Cecil Rhodes when he bequeathed in his will the money to set up a secret society that would help spread British imperialism across the world, and that became what was known as the Round Table groups. And I'm sure the Round Table, goes back to King Arthur and the Round Table, so it's been used for a much, much longer time. But Cecil Rhodes kind of is where my sort of knowledge and history kicks in, because being a student of Richard Grove and a long time learner through his Autonomy course and his materials, Grand Theft World, Peace Revolution podcast, he kind of goes back to Cecil Rhodes and Lord Milner as the sort of provable, verifiable, and historically undeniable conspiracy. And so when we're talking to people about the way the world works, and we're trying to say, how all these, it's just conspiracy theory, and it's like, well, it's conspiracy proven historical fact, actually. And so it's a good place to go back to. So that's where I go back to when I think of Roundtable, is Cecil Rhodes and a Roundtable group. But yeah, Peter's saying they don't refer to banks as cartels for no reason. Yeah, yeah, banking cartels. Yeah, exactly. And the House of it refers to the House of Morgan and the House of Rothschild. So we did a read through of the Romance of the Rothschilds on this channel, which was a 1913 book, I think, giving the kind of official jazzed up story of the Rothschild family without any of the kind of seedier, darker side. But it's good to get that. Heidi says conspiracy fact. Yeah, exactly. And the books and knowledge of the books and the people who've studied these things, that's the best way to convince the disbelievers that, hey, no, this is fact. Look, this dude wrote a book about it, and send them over to my channel to get some learning done. Right, I'm just going to have another swig, and then we will crack on with chapter 4. So that was quite a short, punchy chapter. A lot of details about how the structure and the system and the plan was put in place to get this sort of illegal or illicit or banned cargo on the ship. It's always loopholes. It's always just vague definitions, and it's like, well, it had that label as, what was the label? They had to label it all as non-explosive in bulk. Oh, it was all non-explosive in bulk. We didn't know it was. We didn't know it was going to explode and cause the ship to sink in 18 minutes. How could we? So very interesting. The question, to my mind now, is like, was all that ammo put on there because did they ever want it to get to its destination, or was it put on there so that they could have this 18-minute sinking, this secondary explosion, as mentioned, I think on Wikipedia? It says there was a hit, torpedo hit, and then there was a secondary explosion, and then 18 minutes it went down. So many parallels, and so reminiscent of the September 11th event 2001, right? Of this kind of like, were explosives involved? How did it crumble and pancake so quickly? In this case, how did the ship of that size, that magnitude, sink so rapidly when the Titanic took 2 hours to sink? Was all that were all those explosives put on there deliberately, and because they knew that would facilitate the carnage, the death? I shouldn't drink beer on a live stream, should I? It's making me burp. Make the whole event so much more horrific that the American sentiment against the Germans would be drummed up, whipped up into a frenzy, and they would therefore, sign up to get involved in the war and go fight them. And then this little thing, this quote here about J.P. Morgan declaring his allegiance to the British and the French and the Allies before, the governments did, before the president at the time did as well. Very curious, and then J.P. Morgan being the one that put all the loopholes and the bureaucracy in place to allow that illegal munitions to be put on the ship in the first place. So very interesting stuff. I'm enjoying this book very much, and we are 4 chapters out of 20. I think it's 20 or 19. Yeah, so we got a ways to go yet. So let's crack on with chapter 4. This will probably be my last chapter of the night. It's getting a bit late here. I got to go and spend a bit of time with the family as we count down to the new year. But for now, let's do chapter 4. It is difficult to reconcile President Wilson's well-publicized idealism and neutrality with his sanctioning of the Morgan operation. It is equally hard to imagine more unlikely bedfellows. Dislike and suspicion of each other was both traditional and profound. In June views about the probity of the banking community, and suspected them of trying to organize political decisions to their profitable advantage. Let me know if the sound comes back, please. Hopefully it will. This keeps happening. I just think it might be something to do with the Vietnamese internet. Or maybe I might try the next one from a different room closer to the router. That could be the issue as well. They build all their buildings out of thick concrete here, so it could be messing up the signal. Sounds back. Okay. In 1914, America was beginning to enter a period of acute economic recession, and the bankers realized that with a European war, their normal export trade would be greatly affected, but that both European power groups would have need of money and war material. The administration had hitherto indicated that it would countenance neither the lending of the first nor the provision of the latter. 2 of the banks anxious to float loans for the Allies were the National City and Morgan & Co. They cooperated in a joint approach to make the president change his mind. So this is similar to the Rothschild book, where the Rothschild would influence the royal families and the princes of the time, and the Prime Minister in England as well. And now we've got the Morgan and Co. Trying to influence and make the president change his mind. The operation was entrusted to Thomas B. Lamont of Morgan's and Samuel McRoberts, a vice president of the National City. Their task was a formidable one, and it was made no easier when they realized that McAdoo, the Secretary of the Treasury, was not only almost totally ignorant of finance, but held no real power. His function was to supervise the implementation of the somewhat doctrinaire instructions of his president and patron, Woodrow Wilson. Lamont and McRoberts realized that it was impractical to lobby the president direct, so made their first formal approach to William Jennings Bryan, the Secretary of State. They had an equally formal rejection. Quote, "Loans by American bankers," announced the Secretary, "are inconsistent with the true spirit of American neutrality." End quote. The 2 bankers then concentrated their approach on Bryan's deputy, the young, ambitious, and urbane counselor to the State Department, Robert M. Lansing. Lansing was a State Department lawyer who had specialized in territorial and boundary problems. He was an expert on the ill-defined boundaries of the various trading ports on the Chinese mainland, and his legal mind had doubtless grown accustomed to the subtleties of negotiating Oriental concessions. More important, he had married Eleanor Foster, the daughter of John W. Foster, Secretary of State to President Harris in 1892. So I was just pausing there because I'm thinking of John Foster Dulles, aren't I? And that's a different dude altogether. John W. Okay, yeah, and John Foster Dulles came later, and did he head the FBI or something? The Dulles brothers. Anyway. The connection had brought him into intimate contact with powerful Washington personalities. His father-in-law, since his retirement, had joined the boards of numerous corporations. Washington and Wall Street played at John Foster's comfortable hunting and fishing lodge in Henderson, harbour on the southeastern shore of Lake Ontario. Robert Lansing was frequently there, with his nephews Alan and John Foster Dulles. Oh, I think we have just disconnected. I'm just going to wait till it tells me that they're also here with at Lake Ontario, and yeah, Robert Lansing is the uncle of Alan and John Foster Dulles. Sound is off again. Is it back? Are we back? Testing. I'm just going to keep pointing. I'm not doing the devil horns, by the way. That's just because I'm trying to point at John Foster Dulles. 3 words with 2 fingers. Okay, I got a thumbs up from Chi. Wicked. He was a tall, well-made man, as adept with a bass rod, or a bass rod, as he was with a brief. He habitually wore tweeds and took elocution lessons to develop an English accent. Oh, wow. At this remove, it is difficult to reconstruct his character, but to read his personal papers in the Library of Congress, particularly his meticulously kept desk diaries, gives the overwhelming impression of a chameleon creature, part corporation lawyer, part public relations man. So probably a student of Edward Bernays if he's into public relations. Narrow as his horizons were, devious as his posthumous papers show him to have been, he stands out as someone who always did what he thought was best for the United States and Robert Lansing. He had been appointed to his position in a Democrat administration as a political favor by the president to the Republican senator for New York, Elihu Root, in return for his cooperation in forcing legislation through the Senate. Lansing, by inclination, was a Republican and had numerous personal and financial connections with Wall Street. His nomination had been opposed by Bryan on the grounds that there are substantial reasons to believe Mr. Lansing has been guilty of impropriety in receiving financial benefit from commercial interests, while a relatively junior State Department lawyer. But, oh, sorry, I messed that sentence up. Let me try that again. His nomination had been opposed by Bryan on the grounds that, quote, there are substantial reasons to believe Mr. Lansing has been guilty of impropriety in receiving financial benefit from commercial interests, end quote, while a relatively junior State Department lawyer. But Senator Root had interceded directly with the president, and Lansing was appointed. Okay, so he was getting kickbacks, presumably in return for favors, and Senator Root, Elihu Root, which is an interesting name. I don't think I've ever seen that first name before. Elihu, got him in there and got him the job anyway. As a result, he had little love for Bryan. Bryan, for all his integrity and deep-seated religious convictions, was an untidy, emotional man, incapable of subtlety and with little capacity for reasoned thought. By contrast, Lansing possessed an almost pathologically tidy mind and was meticulous in his attention to detail. He had rapidly become an essential balance to Bryan's emotionalism, and Bryan's had been content to delegate to him both the drafting of diplomatic correspondence and the preparation of the memoranda upon which the President and Bryan could base their policy decisions. From the Lansing papers in the Library of Congress, it is evident that Lansing enjoyed finding flaws in Bryan's policies, possibly never more so than after Bryan had publicly pronounced them. He must have taken considerable relish in informing Bryan in a memorandum on 13th of October 1914 that, quote, the President of the United States possessed no legal authority to interfere in any way with the trade between the people of the United States and the nationals of belligerent countries, end quote. Bryan realized that he had to tarnish the true spirit of neutrality. However, the bankers were very naturally wanted the President's blessing upon their plans, so they used Lansing as their envoy. Samuel McRoberts of the National City Bank prepared a long letter to Lansing, setting out the grave dangers to the United States economy if America's normal trade and international finance were absorbed by countries such as Canada, Australia, and Argentina. McRoberts composed the letter at the bank on the morning of the 23rd of October. Lansing was present, and then took the letter back to the State Department and prepared a memorandum for a policy decision, which was almost word for word identical to McRobert's letter, except that he changed such phrases as "the bank feels" to "I feel." By the time he had finished, it was almost 8 p.m., and Secretary Bryan had long since left for home. Lansing took the memorandum over to the White House that night, and within half an hour had the president's agreement. The next day he informed Morgan and Co. at a meeting at of the Metropolitan Club in New York that the president would not object to their floating credits for the Allies. Bryan learnt the news from the New York Times. Lansing's actions went a long way towards changing America's publicly stated policy of strict neutrality to one of strict legality. His opinions favoured them. If his inclinations had favoured the Germans, he would undoubtedly have eventually been convicted of high treason. Within a month of securing the president's acquiescence to the bankers' plans, he was to render Britain an even greater service, this time at the expense of his own countrymen. Germany had laid mines opposite British ports in the North Sea on the first day of the war. They had informed all neutral powers that they had done so, and given them routes so that they could steer clear of them. In reply, Britain had informed the United States that though Britain had not laid any mines in the North Sea, she reserved the right to do so. All the mines that Britain had had in stock at the outbreak of the war had been laid in the Channel on 8th of August to cover the passage of the British Army to France. Asquith's order to the Admiralty to commence a vigorous mining policy led to the establishment of major British minefields in the North Sea, and on the 2nd of October the United States was informed that, quote, because of German mine-laying activities, the whole of the North Sea must be considered a military area, end quote. So the British mined the whole area, and then they told the United States that it was the Germans that did it. After they've given them all this money, after their J.P. Morgan is helping them out to drag the Americans into war, they're still lying to them. There were no directions as to how to avoid them, and Britain required, in the interests of safety, every ship making passage in those waters to report to a British port in order to receive either pilot or up-to-the-minute avoiding instructions. Any ship that did not do so would be stopped on the high seas and ordered into the nearest British port. All ships, whether they reported as requested or were stopped at sea, were then subjected to search, and numerous cargoes were either delayed or detained. At the same time, Britain declared almost every category of cargo to be contraband, and contraband was confiscated as a matter of course. There was a storm of protest, mainly from American commercial interests, who saw their trade being eroded before their eyes, and also from liberal opinion, which correctly recognized the British action as a form of speculative capture, designed to ease the lot of the patrolling Royal Navy. The Navy claimed they could not search at sea as the cruiser rules stipulated, because of the danger of German submarines. There was dissension within the American cabinet, and the Secretary of the Interior reported to Councillor Lansing in order to help him formulate his diplomatic notes to Great Britain. Quote, England makes a fool of herself by antagonizing American opinion, insisting upon rights of search when she has never acknowledged to herself, end quote. Lansing managed partially to satisfy public opinion in the United States by adopting a show of belligerence which did not fool the British Foreign Office. In fact, it was never intended to. He explained why in his memoirs. Quote, in dealing with the British government, there was always in my mind the conviction that we would ultimately become an ally of Great Britain, and that it would not do, therefore, to let our controversies reach a point where diplomatic correspondence gave place to action, end quote. He concentrated on writing notes of protest that would delay any positive action by the United States, and admitted it quite frankly. Quote, the notes that were sent were long and exhaustive treatises, which opened up new subjects for discussion rather than closing those in controversy. It was done with deliberate purpose. It ensured continuance of the controversies and left the questions unsettled, end quote. With these thoughts influencing him, Lansing committed the United States to tacit acceptance of Britain's doctrine of an almost total blockade and her declaration that the North Sea was out of bounds to the world's shipping without the express permission of the Royal Navy. This supine acceptance has been hailed as a triumph of British diplomacy, but in reality it was the triumph of Lansing's undermining of the beliefs of his own Secretary of State and of the unanimous opinions of the solicitors to the State Department, who had held that the British actions were contrary to international law. With such valuable support from the State Department and from a man on whom the President was tending to rely to an increasing degree, Morgan's had little difficulty in commencing their purchasing operation. It was a vast enterprise. In the first year of operations alone, Morgan's purchased war material worth $1,100,453,950 and earned themselves a purchasing commission of well over $11 million. Such turnover dictated the necessity for sound management, and Morgan had brought in Edward Stettinius, then president of the Diamond Match Co., to head the operation. Stettinius was made a full partner of Morgan and remained in charge of the complete operation throughout the war. He was assisted by British staff sent over from the Treasury and a considerable number of naval and military ordnance officers who wore civilian clothes and were attached to the staff of the British consulate in New York. The senior British officials in New York were Tom Cato, who, as Lord Cato, was to become Governor of the Bank of England, and Sam, later Sir Hardman Lever. That is extremely fascinating. I haven't heard this name before. Tom Cato, who received a lordship and became the Governor of the Bank of England. And this one sentence here really reminds me of The Anglo-American Establishment by Carroll Quigley, because all the way through that book he mentions names, and then in a little parenthesis after the name it says later Sir ... who whatever name, or later Lord ... and it kind of really rams home this point that all these guys involved in the Anglo-American establishment who were formulated and brought together by the Round Table groups of Cecil Rhodes and Lord Milner, and then who were sort of trained through the Rhodes Scholarships program, they all go on to receive knighthoods and lordships and these kind of swanky recognitions and letters after their name and all these kind of recognition for services rendered and it's a big club and you ain't in it, in other words. But that happens almost all the way through Anglo-American establishment. This little parentheses, who later became Sir ... and so that sentence there reminds me of that, and I thought it'd be worth mentioning. Definitely a book that I need to get into, either read on this channel or review for this. All right, carrying on. Morgan handled the negotiations for and the financing of the purchases, and after inspection, the goods ordered were consigned to G.K. Sheldon & Co., the Admiralty forwarding agents. False names were used to prevent the true identity of shippers and manufacturers being discovered by the German intelligence service, the security side being handled by Captain Gaunt. His other responsibilities included the allocation of precious or vital cargoes to the faster ships, and keeping the Admiralty informed as to which ships carried which cargo, and of their destination and estimated date of arrival. So far as security matters were concerned, Gaunt was assisted by the British consul, General Sir Courtney Bennett, who directed the British counterintelligence operation in New York. Sir Courtney was also responsible for screening would-be passengers to England, and this function was eased by centralising ticket issues in one office, no matter which ship a passenger wished to sail on. The office chosen was Cunard's, which had the largest facilities in New York. The Cunard piers were also the scene where most of the contraband ships were loaded. Gaunt had his own desk in the Cunard General Manager's office. In addition to operating its own fleet, Cunard was also charged by the British Admiralty with the port administration and dispatch of numerous other ships, which were under direct Admiralty charter, but for security reasons cleared from New York as under charter to Cunard. The manager of the Cunard operation in New York was Charles P. Sumner, a tall, outspoken Bostonian, known and respected throughout the east coast of the United States as a good steamship man. Sumner had little time for politicians or the activities of Morgan and Co., Captain Gaunt, and Sir Courtney Bennett. He had no time at all for false manifests and legal subtleties, and their acceptance by Collector of Customs Dudley Field Malone. When these were explained to him by Sir Courtney and Gaunt, he reacted violently. So this guy's got a conscience. At least one of them does. There is no precise record of exactly what he did say. On the 30th of October 1914, Sir Courtney was to telegraph Sir Erie Crowe, the Assistant Under-Secretary of State at the Foreign Office and the titular head of the intelligence services, that Sumner, quote, must be in the pay of the Germans, as he had been very offensive and extremely lewd in his refusal to ship munitions in any Cunard passenger ship, end quote. Sir Courtney went on, quote, he sees neither the logic nor the necessity of shipping government supplies in bottoms of British registry, even when those bottoms are under contract to the Admiralty, end quote. It is not difficult to imagine Sumner's reply to the Consul General. As a result of Sumner's stand, the Lusitania sailed home on the 4th of November with a mixed cargo of a general nature. It was the only voyage she was to make without a cargo of munitions. Sir Erie Crowe had a quiet word with Alfred Booth. Sumner's salary was doubled to £5,000 a year, and, hard-headed businessman or possibly conscientious Cunard servant that he was, he withdrew his objections and took the money. Maybe he doesn't have... Yeah, I mean, I suppose most people have a price, don't they? Though Sumner had withdrawn... I obviously spoke too soon when I said somebody had a conscience there. Though Sumner had withdrawn his objections, he had made a serious enemy of the Consul General, and from then on, Sir Courtney's agents delved deep into the Cunard line, shadowing their employees and producing a series of inflammatory and not very accurate reports, of which the following are some samples. German influence in the Cunard Company. The position of the Cunard Company is aggravated by the fact that all shipping companies in the United States advertise in the foreign language press of the United States through the Association of Foreign Language Newspapers, Woolworth Building, New York, the president of which is Mr. Louis Hammerling, a German agent. The association is practically owned and directed by the German shipping lines and by German interests in such large corporations as the Standard Oil and the St. Louis breweries. It is politically powerful and exercises great influence, especially in immigration matters, and hence its use by the shipping companies as a means of advertising transatlantic services for immigrants. There is ample reason for supposing that Hammerling is actively working in German interests both by propaganda and by spying. He was responsible for the recent manifesto of the foreign language press against the export of arms. His influence over the Polish and other Slav, as well as the Jewish and Italian elements in the United States, has recently led the Foreign Office to consider how his activities might be counteracted. The organization established by the German shipping lines and especially the Norddeutsche Lloyd in the United States has been built up for years, and we cannot hope to counteract it by any improvised organization during the war. It is probable that the only way in which safety can be secured for the enormous shipping business about to be carried on in the next few months from the United States for the government is to provide for the supervision of all matters connected with government service in the shipping offices in America by Admiralty officials in those offices themselves, end quote. Oh no, hang on, sorry, the quote goes on. At the head of the Cunard office here is a Boston man, Mr. Charles P. Sumner, who in Boston was always considered to be anti-British, and since his removal here some years ago has been careful not to identify himself with anything of English tendency, and lives and makes his home at a club well known for its German and Jewish propensities, and is indeed there just as popular as he is unpopular outside, both with the public, shippers, and his associates connected with the English lines. Mr. Herman Winter, who is a sort of assistant manager, is a German by birth, actually born in Baltimore, and opinion. He is well known in German circles. He is a member of clubs, mainly composed of Germans. It is stated that he holds a considerable quantity of stock in the Hamburg American Company, and that he has strong and influential German connections, numbering amongst his friends such rabid Germans as... There is no doubt whatever that every vessel of the Cunard Company whilst in the port of New York is kept under the closest possible observation by German agents from the time she arrives to the moment she sails. Even longshoremen that work about the piers have noticed and commented upon the fact that men of unmistakable German appearance have been on the docks at different times, whilst steamers, including the Lusitania, have been tied up. End quote. Oh, sorry, no, one more here. Coming to the Cunard dock, we find an Irishman named Mallon, a discharged member from the New York police force in charge of the police of the dock. Mallon is on very friendly terms with the detective agency which is sending men to Canada to blow up bridges, etc., and which also, in concert with men from Pinkerton's agency, are guarding the Hamburg American docks. He was heard recently to qualify Irishmen who had enlisted in our army as, I guess that's damned fools, to fight for any country that had kept them down all their lives. He has a private office, the Vincent Building, 302 Broadway, full of German Jews. End quote. I think this last paragraph here is back to Colin Simpson's voice and writing. Sir Courtney Bennett kept up a steady flow of similar reports. His final one, sent 2 days after the Lusitania sailed on her voyage, was number 183. Of all his allegations, the most serious was that Cunard continued to pay the salary of a German-born employee called Fahrenheim, although they had banned him from the office. Cunard replied somewhat stiffly that Fahrenheim was an American citizen who had been in their employ for 11 years, and that in the national interest they had suspended him for the duration of the war on full pay. Under the American labor laws, they had no alternative but to continue to pay him or offer him substantial compensation. Perhaps Alfred Booth icily inquired of the Foreign Office public funds would meet this expense. His letter terminated the correspondence. And that, page 63, is the end of chapter 4. What do you think about that? So a little more detail on the people who were kind of running the docks. Nothing too sort of exciting and juicy in there, apart from this Alan and John Foster Dulles showing up, and their uncle Robert Lansing. So that's a really interesting connection. If you were to be mapping out these people and how they know each other and how they're related, you do kind of find that they often keep it in the family. It's often the same sort of families again and again. Perhaps this family, the Dulles, maybe they're mentioned in that book that I talked about at the start of the show. Which I'll just pop up again here for you if I can find it. Yeah, this one, America's 60 Families. I wonder if this book is contains some details about the family that the Dulles brothers and their uncle came from. Peter Estrada says nepotism. Yes, exactly. It is, isn't it? That's it. And you know, this class of people, they're kind of born and raised to believe that they are somehow better and superior, and they have the right to rule over the peons and the normies, and to do whatever they want, and that is their birthright, and the blood in their veins is somehow special and unique and gives them all these kind of powers that we can't have because we're too stupid and idiotic and sheep-like. Something like that anyway. So just yeah, what do you think? Any comments? Let's have a look. Peter says may have to start from chapter 4 next run. Oh, was the sound bad there? Did that make chapter 4 unlistenable? I'll listen back, and if the sound's no good, I'll upload the recording that I made, which should have much better sound. Peter Estrada also said OSS Gladio A and B right after World War One and World War Two. Dulles brothers begat CIA, the coke importers of America. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's great. I hadn't heard that explanation of the acronym CIA before. But did you know about Miles Copeland and his son, who was the drummer or the bass player in the Police? Miles Copeland was a famous CIA operative and wrote The Game of Nations. And his sons set up 3 kind of artists, music companies, record labels, and these kind of businesses. And they set up one called FBI, one called CIA, and the other one was called IRS. And the CIA one stood for something like Copeland International Artists, and I forget what the FBI and the IRS ones stand for. But they certainly do like to keep it in the family, and they like to make sure their sons and their children get all these cushy jobs and positions of influence and power, right? So you missed some of the commentary in chapter 4. Okay, well, that's good to know. Thank you for the feedback. Very helpful. I'll listen to it back, and if needs be, I will upload a hopefully non-messed up um, audio version for your edification. Um, yeah, Pete, nice. You're aware of the alphabet soup agencies yet? Yeah, if you're from Texas, that's not really the USA anymore, is it? You guys are going solo. So good luck. Good luck to you. All right, wicked. Well, if there's no further comments, thank you all for joining me tonight on this read through and persevering with the audio challenges and the Wi-Fi connection. I'll try and set up in the other room nearer the router. That might give us a more stable connection, and we won't have to faff around with audio dropping out, this kind of thing. But I appreciate everybody in the chat giving me the feedback, and that's really important and helpful to to us live streamers to have that interaction and feedback. So, oh, you're living in Australia now, Pete. Good to you, man. Good for you. But I don't know. I don't know if it's much better there, but hopefully you'll feel better there and a bit more secure and comfortable. And maybe you live out in the boonies somewhere, or maybe in the outback, as they say down there. Uh, well, okay, awesome. That is it for today's reading of Lusitania. We're making good progress, but there's still quite a lot to go. You can see from my bookmark there, we have still got quite a bit. So this is going to be quite a long series, I think, to get through all this. But some fascinating tidbits. J.P. Morgan, his involvement, and we're seeing how these kind of how convoluted and complicated these kind of plots are. I mean, they just bribed the guy with the conscience there. They just bribed him. They just doubled his salary to get him to turn a blind eye to this loading of munitions, which were banned onto the ships in the dockyard so that they could be sent over. Which my theory, I'm kind of feeling like it looks like they wanted to get all that munitions onto the ship to make the explosion more spectacular, to make sure more people died, to make sure more Americans died, in order to drum up that anti-German sentiment. So that's kind of how it's shaping up and how it's looking to me. But what do you think? If you have a different interpretation, or you have something that I didn't comment on that you thought was useful or interesting, drop a comment underneath the video. And I think that's about it for me for now. So take care, everybody. Thanks for being here. I hope if you haven't already, check out part 1 and part 2. There was some pretty interesting context on Wikipedia and also in the introduction in those parts as well. And it's worth getting the whole thing from start to finish rather than just dropping in part way through the book. But cool. Thank you again. And I'm not sure when my next stream will be. I'm kind of just doing these on the spur of the moment when I have time. So maybe tomorrow, maybe a couple of days from now, we'll see. Keep an eye out. You can join the Telegram or the Instagram group. Actually, Telegram's the best one. That's where I'm more active. So we've got some discussions in there, and that's where I'll announce when I'm going live. And the only other thing to say right now from Vietnam is Chúc mừng năm mới. Happy New Year. Happy Lunar New Year. We're going into the year of the dragon, I think. There's pictures of dragons everywhere over here anyway, so I'm assuming that's why. So so enjoy the transition into the new lunar year. It's a very good time to set intentions, to reflect on the way we've been doing things, let go of habits that aren't serving us, maybe introduce some good habits that will help us make more progress towards love and satisfaction and meaning and purpose and community and good moral behavior and family and all those things that are precious and valuable to us human beings. So that is it. I'll sign off with that. Take care, everybody. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. And God bless.